Over to you.
Thanks, Heather. You'd never know this was your first time coordinating a service. Nothing I say to you today is secret or hidden. Some of you have likely heard much of the information before. Unitarians across North America will hear similar homilies during the Christmas season because Unitarians have an abiding sense of searching for reasons and truth, and we want to know not just what, but when and why. We want to know the story behind the menorah candles of Hanukkah. We want to know why Muslims fast at Ramadan. And we want to know why the major Christian festivals, Easter and Christmas, were started and what gives them strength and staying power. Why do Unitarians want to know these answers? In our principles, we strive to accept one another and to encourage spiritual growth within each congregation. When we say we strive to accept one another, I don't think we mean just other Unitarians. I think we mean other people of all faiths. In our list of sources, we assert that we draw wisdom from the world's religions to inspire us in our ethical and spiritual lives. We have a tradition of drawing from world religions to enrich our Unitarianism. And we like to talk about being a faith group that can bridge the differences between larger religions because we try to understand the good in each religion. We also, and I'm not going to ask for a show of hands, sometimes feel smug because we believe we have avoided the worst aspects of other religious traditions. On to my talk about the origins of Christmas. For the central figure in Christianity, I had intended to use his Hebrew name, Yeshua, but I will use the anglicized Greek name that is frankly more familiar to all of us, Jesus. Similarly, for his parents, Yusuf and Miriam, I will use the anglicized Joseph and Mary. But it's good to remember that they had those names, not anglicized Greek names. Nobody really knows when Jesus was born. Bethlehem? Sure, why not? In a barn? Okay, fine. On what date? December 25th? Sure, it's as good a date as any. But billions of people celebrate on December 25th. Why? The truth lies in the history of the Roman Empire and the religion of Mithras. I hope to describe how the unnoticed birth of a builder's son named Yeshua became the link between the Hebrew prophets, the Emperor Constantine, and Canada today. So strap in. Epics in the ancient days had a great deal of political influence. Leaders were portrayed as gods. The Christmas story is largely contained in two books called Gospels in the Christian Bible. Depending on one's perspective, these accounts either differ from each other or tell two versions of the same story. The biblical accounts are found in the Gospel of Matthew, namely Matthew 1:18, and the Gospel of Luke, specifically Luke 1:26 and 2:40. That's for Bully Blank and others who are following in their Bibles at home. According to these accounts, Jesus was born to Mary, assisted by her husband Joseph, in the city of Bethlehem. The writer of Luke's Gospel, who wanted to see a new Jerusalem established in Rome, led by Christians, wrote in his book that Jesus was a god. The writer of Matthew, in the writer of Matthew, Christ is portrayed as the Messiah foretold in the Jewish Bible's book of Isaiah. Many of us have likely heard these stories or elements of them. Choirs sing Handel's Messiah, the magnificent choral work, which includes much of the words that I've already said and will continue to talk about. Modern scholars agree that Jesus existed historically, although the quest for the historical Jesus has produced little agreement on the historical reliability of the Gospels and on how closely the biblical Jesus reflects the historical Jesus. Most scholars agree that Jesus was a Jewish teacher from Galilee who preached his message orally, was baptized by his cousin John the Baptist, and who was crucified in Jerusalem on the orders of the Roman prefect Pontius Pilate. Scholars have constructed various portraits of the historical Jesus, which often depict him as having one or more of the following roles: the leader of an apocalyptic movement, the Messiah, a charismatic healer, a sage and philosopher, or an egalitarian social reformer. 300 years after the birth of Jesus, the Roman Emperor Constantine, wanting to settle the complicated religious situation of his day, and wanting most of all to gain control of various factions, convened a conference at Nicaea. The conference attendees established the date of the birth of Jesus, which just happened to be exactly the same as the birthday of an already popular god. I'm going to back up a little bit, sorry. In Greece, 300 years before the birth of Jesus, Alexander the Great was worshipped as a god. Following his example, the Roman emperors often took divine status. All over ancient Europe, India, Egypt, and the Middle East, it was not unusual for humans to be accorded the status of gods. For hundreds of years, the Greeks had deified great warriors and kings, including in their holy books, Homer's Iliad and Odyssey. After Greek power had waned and the Roman Empire had taken over, the Romans continued the practice of giving divine status to great men. For example, Caesar Augustus brought peace to the land that is now Israel, and one inscription states that the people were joyful because Providence has sent to us a savior, this Caesar. The worship of Caesar Augustus and the other Caesars was the de facto religion of Rome and the Roman Empire before the birth of Jesus and for hundreds of years after. So fast forward to about 70 years after the death of Jesus. In the town of Ephesus, in modern-day Turkey, an early Christian wrote 2 books about the religion that a man named Paul was spreading. The early Christian editor named his books the Gospel of Luke and the Acts of the Apostles. Just to simplify, we'll call him Luke, even though that probably was not his name. Luke wanted to demonstrate that Israel and the Jews were the old world and that Rome and the Christians were the new world. Just as Homer had written in his epic about the foundations of Greece, and Virgil had written in his epic about the foundations of Rome, Luke wrote an epic that the new world was the fulfillment of God's plan. The other important thing to draw from the story so far is that Luke was writing a challenge to emperor worship. Luke was boldly setting out to make Christianity the winner in a rivalry between monotheism, the belief in one God and only one God, and hero worship. Like Paul and other energetic Christians, Luke believed earnestly that Christianity was the only path for the world, and he wanted to convince the world that Jesus Christ represented the one and only God. But here's the rub. Except for a scene in which the teenage Jesus is found arguing with the Jewish scholars inside the temple, we do not know anything about the life of Jesus from the time he was born until he's about 30 years old and gets baptized by cousin John. I mentioned the Gospel of Luke and the Gospel of Matthew. The Christian Bible has 2 more important Gospels called Mark and John, plus several letters by Paul. But none of these authors refer to the birth of Jesus as being unusual or special in any way. Conservative Christians believe that the story of Jesus' birth in Matthew and Luke are proof of his divinity. Moments ago, I told you that Luke wrote 2 generations after the death of Jesus, and he wrote with a specific political purpose in mind. Matthew, who wrote his book after Luke had written his, wrote of the miraculous birth based on his earlier reading of the book of the Hebrew prophet Isaiah. Matthew, who was a pious Jew, knew his Torah, so he knew that Isaiah chapter 7 verse 14 said, "Therefore the Lord himself shall give you a sign. Behold, a maiden shall conceive and bear a son, and shall call his name Emmanuel." Let me share my educated opinions. The accounts of the birth of Jesus are myths, and we cannot know when Jesus was born. I'm not saying that the historical Jesus did not exist. I am saying that we do not know anything true about him until he was about 30 years old. With Matthew and Luke trying to persuade the Jews that their man was divine, it is likely that the true details of Jesus' birth, if they were ever known, were lost. In a minute, I'm going to describe the birth of Mithra, a Mideastern god, which is uncannily similar in every detail to the story set in Bethlehem. So far, I've discussed the birth, the Roman emperor worship. I've described Luke's and Matthew's stories about Jesus, and I've briefly discussed our ignorance of the birth date of Jesus. Next, I will tell you about a god who was born on December 25th. Mithra was a Persian god, the god of light and contracts. Roman soldiers who occupied Persia and must have respected the antiquity of its culture adopted Mithra as the hero god of the manly man, a divinity of fidelity, manliness, and bravery. Women were excluded from the caves where the men worshipped Mithra through secret rituals. While they're quite different in person and mission, there are similarities between the legends of Mithra and the story of Christ. Mithra was said to have been born in a cave with shepherds attending. Mithra had been born of a virgin, and his mother was given the title Mother of God. Mithra was a moral god, upholding the sanctity of the contract, even when the contract was made with one who was sure to break it. Initiates into Mithraism were baptized with a trickle of bull's blood. This blood was said to cleanse the initiates from any impurities. Mithra came to be identified with the Greek sun god, Helios. During the time when the Gospels were written, the Romans blended solstice celebrations of such god-men and saviors as Apollo, Dionysus, Mithra, and Theseus into a single festival called the Birthday of the Unconquered Sun, which they celebrated on December 25th. How did the birth of Jesus get integrated into December 25th? In the Jewish Bible, there is one passage that describes the Messiah as the unconquered sun. And this sounds a lot like the earlier non-Christian festival of Roman times. During the 300s, the Christians were forging alliances with the Roman leadership and wanting to align the Christian and Roman festivals. If Christians had holidays on already established Roman holidays, then the risk of persecution would be less, for one thing. In the US, the holiday of Kwanzaa was contrived for the same reason. And for Unitarian youth and young adults, the festival of Chalaka is similar. In the year 440, Pope Julius officially proclaimed December 25th to be the anniversary of the birth of Jesus. Giving Christian significance to December 25th helped the pagan world to align with and embrace Christianity. That is how Jesus got his birthday on December 25th, and why, even now in the 21st century, Christ's Mass is held after the solstice, after 3 or 4 lengthening days, prove again that the sun will rise unconquered. Unitarians and Universalists can embrace Christmas. Although most of us are not Christian, we should acknowledge the deep Christian roots of our faith tradition. If you feel pain or regret when you hear about Christianity, one word for this is cross-cringe, then it seems to me that your spiritual development is a work in progress. This congregation is a good place for that work. I want to conclude with words of hope. The actual date of the birth of Jesus is irrelevant. The important things that we, Unitarians and non-Unitarians, should keep in mind about Jesus are that he was a radical social reformer. Jesus confronted systems of power with his urgent pleas to help the poor and afflicted. Jesus confronted systems of power, he affirmed the inherent worth and dignity of all persons, including lepers, prostitutes, and soldiers, the rich and the poor. The date of his birth may be arbitrary rather than factual, but his continuing impact cannot be denied. In Victoria, historically and today, caring for the homeless and the poor is almost entirely a Christian mission. That is something worth celebrating. Let us think of Elizabeth and Mary. One was too old to have a child and one was too young to have a child. the two of them, Elizabeth and Mary, carrying their angel-announced babies. Let us wish peace on earth to all gods and goddesses, and let us find magic everywhere. Merry Christmas to us all.